Friday afternoon to you, 4 o'clock time for Sports for CLE. Hope your weekend's off to a great start. Thanks for joining us. Quarterback contracts in the NFL. Trevor Lawrence earlier this week, $55 million, a huge guarantee. Not quite as much as Deshaun Watson, but $55 million, same amount per year as Joe Burrow, tops in the NFL. Tua getting ready for one as well. Tom Pelissero on the Rich Eisen show about all those quarterback contracts and what the league is thinking about them.
Obviously, Tua has produced at a higher level over the last couple of years statistically. Daniel Jones, though, also has been a part of a playoff win like Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence now is going all the way to 55. You know, there certainly has been discussion within the league, Rich, among certain owners about even the idea of a quarterback cap, that at some point you want quarterback numbers to not go over a certain percentage of your salary cap. To my knowledge, that really hasn't gained traction, in part because so many teams have paid their quarterbacks. And if you went to suddenly an NBA model where all of a sudden you have the max and the super max, and there's really only a couple levels that guys can get paid at, it kind of changes the dynamics in terms of how you set yourself up salary cap wise and whatnot. So absolutely, there's been a discussion about exactly what you're talking about, which is, how are we paying this much money to this position and to certain guys just because they're the next one up? And that's where that Trevor Lawrence contract for some people is going to be one of those moments where Trevor Lawrence matching Joe Burrow as the highest paid player in NFL history, given a little bit of the inconsistency we've seen from Trevor Lawrence, the fact that he and the Jaguars did not play well down the stretch last year, it does give some people pause, but it's also a reflection that the quarterback market, like the salary cap, is going to continue to go up. So the longer you wait, the higher these numbers are probably going to be, absent what you're talking about, which would be some team convincing a player to take a sub-market deal, which is really hard to do in 2024.
With that, let's welcome in Sam Monson from Pro Football Focus, co-host of the PFF NFL show. Sam, what about it? You know, when you talk about a salary cap for quarterbacks, collusion just comes to my mind, because the NFL, it seems like anytime they try to artificially control contracts in a pro sports league, you start hearing about collusion.
Yeah, and obviously, you know, some ownership might want that to be the case, but you've got to convince the NFLPA as well. You've got to convince the majority of players that that's something that they want and is worth bargaining for and is worth going after as one of their top priorities. And it seems difficult to imagine that happening. You know, as much as quarterback money is going through the roof, and the same thing is true with a couple of other positions. Number one, that's benefiting players, and number two, it isn't necessarily taking money away from all of these other players. Like, the teams still have plenty of money to give away and to dole around the rest of that roster and to assign to all of the other players, to the point where I don't see, you know, every other position in the NFL banding together and saying, we've got to do something about these quarterback contracts. They're getting out of control. So yeah, look, we may be in a world where the quarterback contracts are incredibly high, and they're only going up, and they're starting to look more and more incredible when you look at these numbers. But I don't see it changing anytime soon. And also, analytics, you know, data says that actually, if you look at kind of the percentage, the relative value of the quarterback to every other position, even with the current numbers, they're still underpaid relative to the actual impact that they have on winning and losing games.
Yeah, and, you know, to your point, you know, and we've said this on this show a couple of times, the Deshaun Watson contract is always pointed to because of the guaranteed money. I think he's eighth highest paid. But Andrew Berry and the Browns have been able to do anything that they've wanted to do within reason, free agency. You know, they've been able to sign guys and build a roster around it.
Yeah, and Mahomes is another great example. You know, you can do things with quarterbacks on a giant contract. There's no greater cheat code than a good quarterback on a rookie deal, and particularly, you know, a low round rookie deal. Brock Purdy, the San Francisco 49ers, they have the single best value contract in all of football because Brock Purdy was the last pick of his draft, which means his contract is cheaper than if he'd actually been an undrafted free agent and they'd picked him up and he turned into an incredible player. So there's an immense value to be had from those deals. but it doesn't mean that you can't put a good team around a quarterback once you pay him the big money second contract. And there's a variety of different ways of making that happen, whether it's the Patrick Mahomes type model, whether it's a Deshaun Watson type model, and the way the Browns play with the salary cap. But, gone are the days, I think, where teams are truly and completely hamstrung by a single contract because they've just gotten better at managing the salary cap. This is not the wild west of the early 2000s when teams didn't really have a great handle on how exactly to structure all of this. Teams, by and large, know what they're doing with this stuff now.
So, Dan Graziano from ESPN's Get Up. Can Deshaun Watson recapture what he had with the Texans, that elite skill with the Browns?
I got to lean toward no, because that greatness was high volume passing, right? He led the league in passing yards in 2020 with the Houston Texans. That's 4 years ago. We haven't seen it. He sat out the next season. He was suspended the season after that for the first 11 games. Last year he got hurt. And when he has played, we haven't seen that kind of production. We know that the offense took off late in the year after he was hurt with Joe Flacco running it. So I think there are a lot of questions still to be answered. In the Cleveland Browns' perfect world, sure, he becomes a quarterback that can carry them to a Super Bowl title. But I don't think they view that as essential. I think they need good, consistent, solid quarterback play from him because they feel like they've built a strong roster around. That's fair.
And Sam, I agree with that. They've built a good roster around him. Whenever this topic comes up, I try to think of a quarterback who was elite for 3 years that just kind of lost it, and not due to any major injury. Now he's come back from his shoulder. I can't come up with one. Is there any that come to mind that played and made Pro Bowls, and then all of a sudden, in their mid to late 20s, it just went away?
Yeah, there's certainly not many. There's obviously players that were incredibly good and then injuries hit and they were never the same player again. The closest I could come up with was Mark Bulger back with the Rams. And even that, was kind of like, it was a cumulative effect. It was the weight of the Rams offensive line and the pressure that he was under, and sort of not necessarily any one individual injury, but he just got broken by the sheer volume of pressure that was coming down from that Rams team. But Bulger obviously took over from Kurt Warner, was impressive enough that he effectively forced Kurt Warner out of that starting lineup from the Rams, despite, the story, the greatest show on turf, the Super Bowl, the MVP. Mark Bulger made them move on and give him the keys to that team. And he was really good for a period of time and then declined and just couldn't do it again and did fall off that level. But you're right, it's a very small number, that list of players who hit the kind of heights that Deshaun Watson did, and then it disappeared and never came back again. Certainly without being able to point to, here's one catastrophic injury that guy suffered, and from that point on, they were a different player.
Yeah, so again, if you're Browns fans looking for hope, there's hope, but you get into where you got to start seeing it, on the field.
Yeah, but I think they made a good point on that clip that you showed, that they've almost reached a point now where I think they're almost preparing for the idea that it might not come back. And instead of saying, well, when Deshaun Watson plays at that incredible level, now we're in business, we can contend for a Super Bowl again, they're almost planning as if, okay, what if we never see that player again, but we get a guy that plays reasonably? If we get solid quarterback play, can we build a team around him that can contend with that level of play? That's what the Browns roster looks like right now, is a team that can make the playoffs, that can potentially make noise even when they get there, even without a quarterback playing at an elite level.
So this one from PFF, 2024 receiving core rankings. 49ers 1, Dolphins 2, Eagles 3, Chiefs 16, Raiders 17, Browns 18. Spot could be too low for the Browns. Elijah Moore, Cedric Tillman have yet to make their mark in Cleveland. And Jerry Jeudy, who was acquired via trade this offseason, hasn't lived up to the Alabama hype. Browns receiving core has a higher ceiling than some of the teams near them, but it will be a big prove-it year. I can't argue with any. Other than Amari Cooper, who we'll talk about that contract situation in a minute, there's a lot of question marks with their pass catchers.
Yeah, Amari Cooper, I think, is an underrated receiver and a really high level number one guy for them. Outside of that, it's a lot of players that I think are long on potential, that have a lot of talent, but are yet to show it at a consistent level. There's definitely a world where you can paint the most optimistic picture and the most beneficial outcome for all these guys and say, look, Amari Cooper is your number one. Jerry Jeudy becomes the player that he was supposed to be coming out of Alabama. This high level route running technician that's always open and just is a phenomenal number two option. Elijah Moore can be your do everything slot guy and third receiver. And then maybe Cedric Tillman emerges as a really high level sort of vertical threat or red zone specialist, big bodied receiver that can make some plays after the catch. That's a four deep group that when you can, add David Njoku, a tight end as well, can rival pretty much anybody in the NFL. But anytime in the offseason, you're saying, well, if three separate guys hit the top end of their range of outcomes, we could be special. It very rarely breaks that way. And the chances are maybe one of those guys hits that high end of the range of outcomes and the other two land somewhere in the middle. And then it becomes a solid group, but not spectacular.
So Amari Cooper, Browns' number one receiver, final year of the contract, a little over $20 million, tied for, I think it's 19th highest paid. Didn't go to minicamp, wants another deal. What do you think of that contract dispute, and do you see him again? He just turned 30 on Monday, so I actually get both sides of this argument.
Yeah, I mean, you can certainly understand it from Cooper's perspective, right? Given his age, given what he's done, it's his last real opportunity for a sort of significant big payday and maybe one last pay bump before he starts to decline. He reaches that age where receivers just inexorably, start to go backwards, and that's his career. So it makes perfect sense from his point of view to try and capitalize now, try and get the money while he can. But that's also the reason that the Browns don't really want to give him the extension and the extra money and all those kinds of things. And really, it's kind of been the story of Amari Cooper's career that anywhere he goes, he makes that offense better. He's a really, really good player. And maybe he's not quite the player that he was expected to be when he was coming out, where he looked like one of the best receiver prospects to enter the league in a long time. He didn't really have any flaws as a prospect. Everything was good. He was like a prototypical elite wide receiver prospect. And he's been good, but not quite at that really elite level. He's never been, the top two or three receivers in the NFL. So he reaches the stage, I think, where teams look at the contract that he's on and they start thinking, is he really worth that money? And they eventually move him on. They try and get younger and cheaper. But it never works. Eventually somebody takes a look at that contract and says, yeah, he's absolutely worth that. Given our wide receiver situation, we'll have Amari Cooper for that deal. And they bring him in, he plays really well, and then the same thing happens. The cycle starts all over again. A couple of years in, they look at the contract, look at the salary cap number, and they start having second thoughts again. But ultimately, Amari Cooper makes your football team better. And if you can keep him in the building, you should be trying to do that.
Sam Monson from Pro Football Focus. He is the co-host of PFF NFL's podcast. He and I are going to take one time out. On the other side of the break, we'll head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason, talk a little bit about the Browns running backs. Sports4CLE, be right back. Stay with us.
Moneymaker from the Ohio Lottery has no interest in beating around the bush. Money Maker. You play the game, you could win money. Up to $2 million. With more than $88 million in prizes from $50 to $500. Moneymaker cuts right to the cash. Unlike this guy.
We continue talking Browns with Sam Monson from Pro Football Focus. Let's head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Hi, this is Mustafa, 50-year Browns fan. I'd just like to give a little accolades to somebody that didn't get very many this offseason, and that's Jerome Ford. I mean, he played solid for us last year, broke some pretty big plays for us, and I think he's getting overshadowed, the return of Nick Chubb and also the receivers that we picked up and also the defense. I think his play is getting overshadowed, and he's going to be one to watch for this season. Go Browns.
So I always appreciate all of the voicemails. Sam, the thing about Ford. Ford had some really big explosive runs, but there are a lot. I think it was almost 16% of his runs no yards or 1 yard gains, and that's. I know both tackles were injured, so I preface it with that. It's got to be better than it was.
Yeah, I think the caller kind of summed it up well. He had some really solid play for them. And given expectations, maybe he's right that he does deserve more credit for that. A fifth-round draft pick, a guy that sort of came out of nowhere to be the primary backup, and suddenly now he's got to be the starter with Nick Chubb's catastrophic injury. Playing the way he did was a pleasant surprise. Like, that was a good result for that player. And he had some really impressive runs, some spectacular runs in there, a bunch of explosive plays. I think a few things worked against him or work against him long term. They don't seem to have ever trusted him to carry the load. I think he had 20 carries once over the course of the season. Late in the year, Kareem Hunt started to see a much bigger role as well. And it's almost like the longer they went on, the more Ford's playing time was being diminished or shrunken. He had a lot of drops last year as well. If you wanted him to be an every down back going forward, a factor in all phases of the game, I think he had 9 drops. So the receiving element of that is a bit of a question mark as well. Overall, I think he definitely showed that he can obviously play at this level. He can make some spectacular plays, but I think they're right to let's try and build in more contingency. Let's try and get a specialist receiving back, and a guy like Nyheim Hines can be that, someone that can take those plays on third down. And then let's just make sure we have another option, because they haven't trusted him to get 25, 30 carries in a game. They want to divide up that workload if they can.
You mentioned Hines. What are your thoughts of Hines and Deontay Foreman, who the Browns also brought in? Foreman's an intriguing guy. I keep seeing these things where when he gets 15 to 16 carries, he usually gets 80 yards, or he gets 80 yards.
Yeah, Foreman's almost like a poor man's Derrick Henry. He's this supersized throwback of a running back, this giant bell cow type of running back, again, in an era where that's not usually the case anymore. Like, almost all teams now are using some kind of running back by committee and are not giving all of the workload to one bell cow. I think Foreman's actually a guy that would thrive in that environment more. Almost a back playing out of his era. If he came along 15, 20 years ago, maybe that was the right type of environment for him. But he's a solid contingency. Like, he's a good example of what we were talking about before, of let's just make sure we have some more options there. And then Hines, I think his value gets increased by the change in the kickoff rule, and the potential that kick returners can become a bigger part of the game on Sundays than they have been the past few years, as that play has been sort of slowly getting removed from the game. Now that theoretically it's back and kick returners can have a much bigger impact, a guy like Hines could have an oversized value relative to just what he can do as a pure running back.
So this is from Dogs by Nature. 5 players who could become first-time Pro Bowlers this year for the Browns. Number 1, they go with safety Grant Delpit. Number 2, the kicker, Dustin Hopkins. Number 3, Jordan Hicks, linebacker, who the Browns signed as a free agent. 4 is Martin Emerson, cornerback. And number 5, Ethan Posick, the center. When you look at those, who are the guys of those 5 that you think, that could end up being a Pro Bowler this year?
I think Emerson absolutely has the ability to do that. I mean, he's a ball hawk that can make plays on the football. He's had a ton of pass breakups in his NFL career so far. And cornerback is this inherently volatile position where the top guys are not necessarily the top guys the following year. And the variance and the ability for somebody to kind of insert himself into that Pro Bowl conversation that wasn't necessarily there the previous season, or isn't top of mind for everybody when the season starts, is so much bigger, I think, at corner than it is at a lot of other positions. Jordan Hicks is a player I was actually kind of surprised hadn't been to one before, and sort of shows you sometimes what the Pro Bowl voting can be. But I think those 2 guys would definitely be the top of my list.
You mentioned Hicks, and that's a guy the Browns signed. I think it's 5 straight years, over 100 tackles. What do you see from him? What kind of linebacker are the Browns getting in him? What are we going to see from him once the games start to count?
Yeah, I think he's a player that's built for today's NFL. He's somebody that has a feel for coverage, that is able to move well, that gets himself into zones in the correct space and kind of squeezes those passing lanes and those throwing windows for quarterbacks. And then the issue is just that linebackers become such a difficult position in today's NFL. Like if you think of the Shanahan offenses, the Sean McVay offenses, like all these offensive developments over the past 10 years, they're all attacking linebackers. There's that meme of Kyle Shanahan putting a bullseye or a target or the crosshairs on a linebacker, just identifying that guy and going after him relentlessly with the offensive game plan. And that really is a microcosm of what today's offense is. Those guys are being put in conflict every single play. And it's so hard for linebackers now to play at an elite level when you're playing off the ball and they're just in torn between a rock and a hard place every single play.
Sam Monson, appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Sam.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
Sam Monson, Pro Football Focus. Make sure you check him out. He is the co-host of the PFF NFL podcast. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. We continue talking Browns. Brad Ward from the Orange and Brown Report straight ahead. Stay with us on Sports4CLE.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns on Sports4CLE. Former NFL linebacker Bart Scott on if Deshaun Watson can recapture his greatness with the Browns. This from ESPN's Get Up.
Yeah, I'm perplexed because this still is a very relatively young quarterback, who should be entering the prime of his athletic career. But I ask myself, is it more player or scheme, right? Because you talk about the difference in scheme and using him and utilizing his talents, because when Joe Flacco came in, he played well. But you also talk about the fact that without Brian Callahan, which is a sneaky big loss, do they open it up a little bit more and not be such a run-centric type of team, especially with Chubb coming off of the injuries with the weapons that they have on the outside with Judy? So does he get more of what he wants with being able to throw the ball a little bit more than he did in previous years?
With that, let's welcome in Brad Ward from the Orange and Brown Report, All Eyes on Cleveland podcast. Brad, I think there's something to that scheme match, and I think that's the reason that we saw all of the shuffling and changes on the offensive coaching staff.
Yeah, the turnover was just kind of Stefanski's way of saying no turning back, right? Like, it felt like they attempted to do it last year, but for a number of reasons, including Chubb's injury and Watson not looking his best at the beginning of the year, it felt like they turned quickly back into what they were most comfortable with, right? And more of the staple Stefanski stuff. And at that point, then, when you started the quarterback carousel, you kind of had to do that, right? So the changes on the offensive side of the ball on the staff, I think, are very clear here what direction we're going. Some sort of a hybrid Dorsey Stefanski offense with some other stuff mixed in. There's a number of guys that run offenses in there, and they've all collaborated together, and it feels like they're going to throw the ball more for sure.
Yeah, and it really feels like they're trying to fit this offense around the skill set of Deshaun Watson. I won't say that they didn't do that before. I think they're taking it a couple steps further than they did the past couple of years.
Yeah, they're trying to replicate some of the things that he was able to do in Houston, right? Like off-schedule stuff, being able to see the field in a more spread look. And I think that, and less of the more timing stuff that, Stefanski is known for. I think is kind of what they're looking for. Letting him just, see the field and make play more than, need to be here, 2 steps here, 3 steps there, get it out on time. And not that that's not part of any offense, but maybe less of that and more of here I can see the field, I can see the coverage, and I can adjust accordingly because that's where he's at his best. So I do. They're turning this into uh, as they should, change the offense to fit the quarterback and try to highlight his best skills.
Yeah, that's the reason you go out and you get him and you pay him what you did. And you give up the first round picks. You put him in a
Absolutely.
best possible position to succeed. This one's from Sports Illustrated. 100 bold predictions for the 2024 NFL season. Number 13 on their list. Deshaun Watson will throw for 32 touchdowns and run for another 10, despite the team's bolstering its roster with 2 veteran quarterbacks who both have a heaping of starting experience. Watson will be able to piece himself together after an offseason shoulder surgery and have the season that some who still root for the team have hoped for. Brad, I think you and I both said this. If he's on the field for 14, 15, 16, 17 games, I think he puts up the numbers. I don't have any doubt of that.
I agree. I about fell out of my chair when I read this from Sports Illustrated. You just don't read anybody with a positive take like this on Watson ever. But yeah, so good to see. I believe it. If he's healthy and he's on the field, then I believe he'll figure it out. The detriment for him so far, at least last year, I can say more than even the first year, but last year the detriment was just not being able to stay out on the field, because when he did figure it out for short periods of time. So keep him on the field, keep him healthy, keep him upright. And like you said, I think those numbers are attainable. It was just good to see a national, point of view recognize that.
Yeah, there's a couple of them that are starting to trickle out. So I know you wrote an article. Kevin Stefanski, Andrew Berry should transcend any ties to the Deshaun Watson deal. Take us through that and kind of how you arrived at it.
Yeah, so, you read a lot, like even after the extension, you read a lot nationally where they're like, hey, despite the extension or no matter what, Andrew Berry, and then sometimes they'll throw in Stefanski too, will be tied to Deshaun Watson and his fate. Will they survive his fate? Like if he fails or doesn't work out, will they survive that? I'm at the point, Dave, where regardless of what happens with Deshaun Watson, I feel like these are the 2 men that should lead the organization into the future. I think you value them. This extension, I think, proves that, that they feel that way too. Now, we've seen a lot of teams pay coaches to go away in the NFL, is what somebody would say, right? Despite extensions. But I just feel like at this point, they've made it very clear that they're the right guys for the job. And regardless of what happens with Watson, they should be here to either work with him into the future or make the next decision on who's the next quarterback and coach him up as well. It would be a mistake to send 2 guys that are so highly thought of around the league. I mean, they'd have jobs in a second. There are a lot of NFL teams that would take these guys immediately. And to fire them strictly based off of that decision would be, I think, ill-advised. And I don't think that the ownership looks at it that way anymore. I think that they have transcended the Watson decision.
Yeah, and to your point, they swang big for, they haven't been able to figure out the quarterback position in this franchise. Bernie Kosar was that's back in the 80s. So we'll see. If it doesn't work out, I'm with you. They've done enough other things that have been good that shouldn't ultimately cost them their jobs. Another article he wrote, all of the angles with the Amari Cooper contract situation.
Yeah, it's tricky, right? So you try to look at it from a team angle and you try to look at it from a player angle. I won't get into real deep into the weeds, but from Cooper's camp, they have leverage, right? So he's their clear number one. I think that if you're the agent on that side, you're saying, I don't want to send my player to practice in training camp or mini camp. We'll see about training camp and mini camp without any guaranteed money on his deal this year. That just wouldn't be good advice from any agent, right? So I think that makes sense. And they realize that in looking at the market, they're owed due some money and they want some security. So, from that point of view, it makes a lot of sense. From the team side, you're like, okay, yes, sure, I believe that, but the team doesn't want to. You don't want to extend a guy or give him guaranteed money into his probably past the age of too much past the age of 32. Now Amari's a little different because he's more of a technician, so he may age better in the league than some guys, right, who depend more on all their athleticism to succeed. But I just, as a team, I don't think you want to send him, guarantee him a bunch of money into. I wouldn't want to do it past 25, right? I think you can sign him to a 4-year deal, whatever, make the deal look like whatever, but I would only want to pay him for 2 years. So the sticking point is probably somewhere in the years. I doubt the money is an issue, APY for the Browns, right? The thing with Cooper's side is this, right? You have leverage, but only to a point, Dave. If you over ask, then you make a huge mistake. And if you're too stubborn, you make a huge mistake and you end up playing out this deal in a prove it year at age 31 that before you go on the free agent market next season, which is not a great position to be in when you're looking for your last big paycheck, right? It's because it's not like you can sit out and not take the $20 million. So if the Browns want to play hardball and they think his requests are outrageous, they can sit back and say, okay, go ahead and play out your deal on the $20 million and we'll make a decision after that. But at that point, both sides are in a tough spot because the Browns don't have a number one of the future if he leaves, for sure, right? And then, Cooper's out there trying to play for his biggest contract, last contract of his life at age 31. And I just think it behooves both sides to come to a resolution at some point here.
Yeah, my gut feeling is this is an organization that they don't like to really do take it or leave it. They try to find solutions with their players so that everybody feels good about it. So we'll see. Again, it's a tough spot because I understand Cooper wanting money that, he feels he's still one of the elite receivers and his production has said that. And I understand the Browns saying, yeah, but we got to be careful past the age of 30, turned 30 on Monday of this week. So before we go to break, another article that you wrote, things you think you know about the Browns. Myles Garrett speaking with a newfound sense of urgency. Cedric Tillman gains an edge in the wide receiver competition. And Bucky Brooks, an assessment of why Cooper could break NFL records in the Browns' 2024 offense. So take us through a couple of those quickly.
Yeah, so I noticed, it was weird. I was watching Garrett when he showed up for minicamp, and it was just the first quote randomly that I saw on social media from him in his press availability, and I was like, man, Myles sounds different. He's often lighthearted and joking around with the media and this and that, but he was very serious. He was talking about new focus, the opportunity they have, not talking about individual accolades. He's talking about the city, this team, the opportunity. And he even said it. He was like, this is different. He was like, this is different from when I was younger. I believe he has a newfound sense of urgency. He kind of even said that. He was like, more leadership, more work, more everything, in a bunch of his quotes, which were really more pointed than he usually gets at this time of year, right? So I thought that was interesting that he came in with what appears to be a newfound sense of urgency, or at least one where he realizes, hey, it's time to, if we want to win big, we got to do it now. And I thought that was noticeable with him. Cedric Tillman, with Judy missing minicamp, and Amari not there, Tillman's got a great opportunity so far in OTAs and minicamp to show what he can do. And he got high praise from Stefanski, high praise from Watson. I guess he didn't miss one day of the offseason program. He looks bigger in his upper body. He's definitely been working. He looks fast. He looks strong. He's expanded his route tree, which was basically nothing coming from Tennessee. So the guy's worked hard, and I believe he does have an edge on the other guys vying for that fourth spot in the wide receiver room.
Yeah, and then Bucky Brooks listed Amari Cooper as a guy that could break Calvin Johnson. I think he had 5 of them, and Cooper was 5th. Could break Calvin Johnson.
Yeah, it's a weird list.
Yeah, it was very weird.
So the number for Calvin Johnson is 1964, and Hill has been close, right? 1,700 back-to-back years, which makes sense. Tyreek Hill. Then they had Amon-Ra St. Brown, Justin Jefferson, sure. Threw in George Pickens at 4th, which I didn't get that at all. And then they threw in Cooper, and they mentioned the offense and opening up the offense and everything. And I do think it's going to be opened up, Dave. We already talked about that, and they're going to throw it more. But I expect it to be not like Bucky was kind of talking about, like how he compared it to Stephon Diggs in Buffalo's offense. Sure, it's going to be a Dorsey. There's going to be aspects of it and concepts of it that are from Dorsey, but I think it's going to be more of a hybrid combination of a number of guys they have in the building. So I don't know if it's exactly what you'll see from what you saw in Buffalo. So I don't know if that's a perfect parallel. And there's a lot of mouths to feed in Cleveland, right? So you have Judy there now, and Njoku, Cooper, and of course Elijah Moore, Tillman, go down the line. I just think him going for 2,000 yards would be surprising.
Yeah, I would agree with you wholeheartedly. Brad Ward from the Orange and Brown Report, All Eyes on Cleveland podcast, and I'm going to take a quick time out. On the side of the break, we'll head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. Sports for CLE. I'll be right back. Stay with us.
Moneymaker from the Ohio Lottery has no interest in beating around the bush. Money Maker. You play the game, you could win money. Up to $2 million. With more than $88 million in prizes from $50 to $500. Moneymaker cuts right to the cash. Unlike this guy.
We continue talking Browns with Brad Ward from the Orange and Brown Report and the All Eyes on Cleveland podcast. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Yeah, this is Daniel. I'm right in Florida. The turnover statistic is the most influenced translator to wins and losses, to the extent that the team with the lesser turnovers wins at about a 70% rate, being the worst in the turnovers since 2022, and the impact of said turnovers really needs to be addressed. As Jim Brown said, carrying the ball to the outside not only helps to lessen the hits on the ball, but also gives you a free arm to help deliver a blow against the tackler. So I just would like to say that's what we need to address the focus on, and that will help out a lot, I believe. What do you think? Go Browns. Woof, woof.
As always, appreciate all the voicemails. So, Brad, he's calling in reference to a graphic that we showed. The Browns have turned the ball over in 29 of 34 games since 2022. It's worse than the they're down there with the Commanders, and I believe the Patriots and the Panthers. And when you think about, they've won a fair amount of games, given that they've turned the ball over at least once in 29 of 34 games. That means there's only been 5 games the last 2 years where they haven't turned the ball over.
It's actually remarkable that they've won that many games with that kind of a figure, Dave. And last year alone, -7, and they get to win 11 games and go to the playoffs, right? So -7 on the turnover. 23 interceptions collectively last year. Now, 5 different quarterbacks and all that stuff, but still, and Flacco was throwing them at a rapid rate while throwing touchdown passes at a rapid rate. So that compounded that issue. 14 fumbles. It just has to be better, right? And I think if you're not playing quarterback carousel, where it's somebody different every week, that probably is a little bit easier to manage. But the -7 number with the kind of defense you have, makes it even more, outlandish, right? Like with the caliber of players you have on defense who are creating takeaways. They had 18 interceptions themselves, which is no number to, sniff at. That's they need to be on the positive side weekly, not just even in a season. So, and Stefanski talks about it all the time, but it's a matter of doing it. And I think once again, this kind of goes back to like what we talked about earlier. If Watson can stay healthy and play the majority of a 17-game season, I think that number looks a lot different.
Yeah, and it has to. If we're talking about it, you can be sure the analytically driven Browns organization is talking about it as well. All right, 3 burning questions facing the Browns post minicamp. Another one of your articles. Number 1, defensive tackle rotations. 2, who calls the play for the Browns this season? The plays. And how will the Browns handle the new kickoff rule? Can they protect Dustin Hopkins? So take us through that one.
So to start with, how many defensive tackles can they keep, right? So it's
they're good.
They have a bunch.
There's going to be somebody that's not there that's going to be able to play in the league.
It's a great problem to have. But you've got 5 that are like locks for the roster already, if you count the 4 guys you brought in and Hall. So now you're looking at Ika and Briggs, and Ika was a 3rd-round draft pick last year. So I doubt he clears waivers. It would be my thing, right? Like that would be tough to get him into the practice squad. And they are changing a little bit of their looks up front from like 2-3 techs all the time to a little bit of shade nose and 3 tech, which means, outside of Dalvin Tomlinson, the only other guys that can do that are Ika and Briggs. So are they thinking of keeping 6 defensive tackles, which would be crazy? But I mean, you could do it, I guess. You would just have to make a concession someplace else on the roster, but it's something to keep an eye on, and something that I've wondered about a number of times, because you got 2 in Ika who didn't show much last year, but he's still a very talented guy, and Briggs as well, even as a 7th-round pick too. You wouldn't want to dismiss from your program right away, but that's just the position they're in right now. Who will call the plays? I've said this over and over. There was a quote, I'm sure you've played it on your show, from QB Unplugged, where Watson talked about Dorsey running everything in practice and all this stuff. And a lot of people took that quote to mean that Dorsey would call plays. I'm still saying Stefanski. I still think it'll be him at the end of the day. They've been taking turns each day calling the plays into the quarterback at minicamp and in OTAs. And although he's letting Dorsey do his thing with installs and all that stuff, I think that, like, if you do watch QB Unplugged and listen to Watson, multiple times he has referenced kind of the shorthand him and Stefanski have, even in like the 5-10 seconds they have free of calling a play in the headset. Like, hey, look for this here. Here's what we're looking for on this play. Like, and I think some of that stuff is why Stefanski has been successful at managing, 4 quarterbacks to wins in one season. So I think he's very good at, sequencing plays, all that stuff. I hate to see him give up that job, and I don't think he will. Lastly, this one is kind of, I don't know what to do. So Justin Tucker came out and said, I don't know if you saw this, 25%. In him watching tape, he said that 25% of the XFL kickoffs, going back and watching the new kickoff, resulted in the kicker being involved in the tackle. So my first thought is, please get Dustin Hopkins off the field. If 25% of the kicks are going to result in him being involved in the tackle, he was involved in 1 last year and he was lost for like the season, right? So 25%, that's crazy. And Tucker's talking about getting in the weight room. That's insanity. If you can find anybody else to kick the ball in between the 20 and the goal line, then you got to find a way to do it, or have him kick it and run off the field, Dave. I don't want him involved in any kind of, touchdown saving tackles. That he's too valuable. He's just too valuable. And if that's a real statistic, and it's hard to believe. So either the XFL was terrible at covering this kickoff, or the Browns need to figure out a different solution.
All right. Before I let you go, again, it was announced during the week that the Browns and the rest of the AFC North will be the Hard Knocks in-season topic. Just your thoughts about that.
I think it will. It's obviously different from the regular Hard Knocks that but they were on in 2018, and I think that it will show the Browns in such a better light than the 18 did, right? Like, so it will do the organization a favor, and the professionalism and the way that they operate now compared to 18 is laughable, right? It's night and day. So I think that's a good thing for the organization, was my first thought. Secondly, it'll affect different individuals differently. And, I have I've had Ken Rogers, who's the showrunner NFL Films, on my show every year since Hard Knocks started. So I texted him, asked him if he was doing the in-season one. He said he was. And I said, well, how are they going to do that? And he said, basically, we're going to follow the narratives that are there, right? Like, so, what's happening with what team in December of an NFL season will kind of dictate the storylines, right? So coming in December, hopefully they're hoping for a dogfight for the division, right? And they can highlight the rivalries and all that good stuff. But I do think that a couple things to point out that I wrote about were, this could be really good for Watson or really bad, right? Depending on what kind of year he's having. Bring cameras in the locker room in December and you're struggling would not be great. It just amplifies the pressure. To bring cameras in the locker room when you're doing great could be, something that changes the way he's viewed, right? Like something he's trying to do with the podcast. So if you go either way there, I think Stefanski and Schwartz, Stefanski's a 2-time coach of the year, Dave. Most people around the country don't know anything about him outside of Cleveland, right? So I think that would shine a light on him positively. Schwartz's charisma will come off well. Jameis Winston will be a star. All he has to do is get in front of the camera. He's fantastic. I think the other storyline to keep an eye on is, we don't know the timing with Chubb coming back, but that could be a big factor and something they highlight as well. So some thoughts on narratives there.
Yeah, without question. And I'm with you with Kevin Stefanski. I think if you get a behind-the-scenes look, and you're going to like what you see. He's going to come off very, 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 very likable, and that's a good thing. Brad Ward, as always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Brad.
Thank you, Dave. You're the best. Thank you for having me.
Brad Ward, make sure you check him out, Orange and Brown Report. He is also the host of the All Eyes on Cleveland podcast. We're just upside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, Lance Reisland from the plain dealer, cleveland.com. Film breakdown, video analysis of what Jim Schwartz and this defense can do against some of the elite quarterbacks they're going to be facing this year. Sports for CLE. We'll be right back. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program is dedicated to recognizing exceptional students, teachers, and schools throughout Ohio. Scan the QR code on screen to nominate students and teachers as Academic All-Stars and Teachers of the Month. They must be currently enrolled or teach in grades K through 12. Is your K through 12 school developing students' literacy skills to achieve success in reading? If so, you can nominate your school for the School of the Year. Students can win $100, teachers can win $500, and schools can win $2,500. Scan the QR code, fill out the forms, and nominate deserving students, teachers, and schools today. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program takes pride in honoring exceptional students, teachers, and schools across Ohio. Submit your nomination today. It's fun, fast, and free. We continue talking Browns on Sports4CLE. We're going to take a look at how the Browns defense, some of the things Jim Schwartz can do against the elite quarterbacks that the Browns play. And whenever we take a film breakdown video analysis, we welcome in Lance Reisland from the plain dealer, cleveland.com. So Lance, the list is pretty impressive. It's Prescott, Hurts, Herbert, Carr, Mahomes, Burrow twice, Jackson twice. You throw Russell Wilson and Justin Fields in there once or twice. You're up into double digits with elite quarterbacks. So when you looked at this, kind of how did you approach what can the Browns defense do against these elite quarterbacks?
Well, there's two things I looked at. First, I went back to my old, even at the high school level. So when you face an elite guy, there's two things you can do. If you're undermanned, you got to scheme it up, right? You got to trick them. You got to do certain things. The Browns don't have to do that. So the Browns obviously have their scouting report if the guy's mobile or not mobile. A couple things you got to keep in mind. First of all, they're going to make their plays. You got to limit those plays, and you have to make plays as a defense as well. But the Browns are in a position where they have the personnel that they should make the offense adjust to them. And the way that I think the Browns should attack these quarterbacks only changes is if the guy can move or not. But these quarterbacks have to prepare for the Browns defense. These quarterbacks that they're playing will not see a better defense than what the Browns are going to offer them. And the Browns got to kind of have that mentality when they go into practice that these quarterbacks are going to see something they haven't seen before. And I think that's possible with the depth they've added to certain positions. Obviously, there's things up in the air, but the Browns have to do what they do. They've committed to this pressure stuff. Stick with it. Get after the quarterbacks and make them adjust to them.
Yeah, and that's kind of Jim Schwartz's mindset when you hear him say, we're gonna do what we do. All right, so the first thing, take us through this clip and kind of what you see here from the defense.
Well, normally what you're going to see, so this is a great play by Myles Garrett, but this is a really good play by the defense. So you're going to see the entire Browns defense play on the other side of the ball, right? And they do this a bunch because they have so many in the up in the box, 7, 8 in the box, and they also gap penetrate. You're going to see Myles with great extension. He's going to peek inside, and he's going to get rid of Beckton. Now, this is just the idea of the Browns have to make these elite quarterbacks one-dimensional. So it sounds kind of weird, but they have to make them pass only. Because if they can run and pass, then the defensive line and the secondary and the linebackers have to play both. As good as these quarterbacks are, if they do not have a run game, they will struggle. Now, of course, they're elite and they'll make some plays, but in terms of sacks and protection and things like that, without a run game, it's going to be really, really tough. So what the Browns have to do is make them one-dimensional, get to that second and third and long, and then they got a chance. And then if they win first down, they're in control now. So I think first thing they got to do is make them one-dimensional.
So the second point that you have here is we look at what Browns defense needs to do against these elite quarterbacks. Create matchups in your favor. Take us through this clip and what you mean by this.
So this is you're going to see. I have another clip here in a little bit that really exemplifies it in terms of pressure. But what you want to do now is you want to get these guys to second, third long. Now you got Beckton, and Browns did a really good job of getting one-on-one with Myles and Beckton by covering the tackle, slanting, bring a linebacker to that side, showing the linebacker in the gap. Whatever it was, Schwartz does a great job of getting Myles one-on-one with Beckton, and Beckton really struggled with Myles' ability to bend and his power. So again, by stopping the run on early downs, as you saw in the last clip, it then allows them to rush the passer. If they can win first down, they're going to be as good as there is in the NFL on defense. They got to win first down. And then this is what you're going to get a bunch of here with all 10 of these guys that can really get after the passer.
All right, so you had mentioned the kind of plan only changes relative to mobile and non-mobile quarterbacks. So this next one, non-mobile guys, take us through this and what you think the Browns can take advantage of here.
So as this play goes through a couple times, you're going to see the Browns defense tackle. He's got Jordan Elliott, who's not long along with him, but they have guys who are as good or better. He's just going to get in that B gap. You're going to see Myles Garrett up on top. He's going to get in C gap. Now, what the Browns do really, really well is that you can't see is you're going to see the center look to his right. And the reason he looks to his right is because that's where Dalvin Tomlinson is, and that's where Walker was walked up. So he had to adjust and make sure they had enough bodies to the right, which creates a one-on-one to the left for both Elliott and Myles. Now, Elliott wins here in B gap, but this is the idea of a non-mobile quarterback. The thing you have to do to a non-mobile quarterback, besides getting sacks off the edge, is continuously pressure him right in his face. There's nothing that bothers a quarterback more, especially a mobile guy, than pressure in his face. It gets his eyes down and not where they should be downfield. So, when the Browns face the Prescotts, Joe Burrow, Herbert, Derek Carr, Patrick Mahomes, a little bit different, but that inside pressure is going to help those elite guys who don't move very well.
The other thing that you point out is with the non-mobile guys, you can put 7 in coverage.
Yeah, so what you get is that if you can only rush 4, now that guy he's a mobile pocket guy. So you think I'm going to use Justin Herbert as an example. If Justin Herbert gets 3.5 or, a little bit above that to throw the football, he's going to find a guy. The reason why the Browns have to be able to win with 4, which they can, especially if it's 3rd and long, is that they're now covering with 7. If you're covering with 7, you can take away all those underneath routes, all those hot routes, anything underneath the short controlled passing game. And then you're in man coverage, and then those receivers have to beat your elite DBs. And that's why you went out and paid those DBs. So, again, it goes back to winning on 1st down. But if the Browns face a non-mobile elite quarterback, get that A-gap pressure and allow those 7 guys behind you to cover.
All right, so this next one is mobile guys. And because of the mobility, you're saying add a 5th guy in pressure. So take us through this.
Well, you're going to, over the years, Lamar Jackson, these guys can move, have really struggled with pressure. So this is a really cool blitz by Jim Schwartz. So as the play rewinds a number of times, you're going to see Zadarius Smith is on the guard and Myles Garrett is on the tackle out there. Now, what the Browns do very well, again, you're going to see the center. The center is going to have to block Walker, who's no longer with the Browns, but it doesn't matter. It's just a back. So you're going to see 79 has to block Walker. Walker's not blitzing. All Walker is doing is occupying number 79. So 79 has to block him, because if he doesn't come, the center will just slide to his left and take Delpit. But by putting all that pressure on that left guard and that left tackle with Zadarius Smith and Myles on the side, covering the center, now you bring Delpit. What I like about what the Browns can do with this pressure is bring more pressure. So if Delpit comes, have JOK be the guy behind. JOK comes, you can have Delpit be behind. So they have these second-level athletes that can track these guys down as well. So maybe one blitzes, one is a spy coming off the edge. The other thing they have to do if they face the mobile guys, the outside guys have to rush in their lanes. So Myles has to stay outside. Zadarius has to stay in B-gap so these mobile guys don't have anywhere to go, and then you can get there with that 5th guy. So a lot of people say stay back. What's shown to be real successful at all levels is bring pressure on these mobile guys. Make them make decisions quickly or run with the ball, and then use your athletes, which the Browns have. So, again, just a really cool scheme by Schwartz. And everybody says, how does Schwartz get these one-on-ones? Here's a great look at it.
All right, so the next point that you have with these elite quarterbacks is a guy who really has stepped up, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah.
So if you look at this snap, watch him number 6, watch him redirect his screen, and then he is just shot out of a cannon. And, this past week I was at mandatory minicamp for all 3 days, and I had an opportunity just to sit there on the sidelines and be 3 to 5 yards away from JOK, and to see his explosion in person is so impressive. I also think he's added some thickness, especially to his lower body. So now he's just, it's hard to put into words how explosive this guy is. So whatever your plan is, use this guy as a weapon. Bring him off the edge, in which he had sacks off the edge. Bring him in. Bring him in the A and B gap if you think you have a matchup there that you like. Put him in coverage. Spy him on the quarterbacks. Whatever it may be, use this guy like a weapon. Use him like an offensive specialist, a guy that you just use all over the field to make plays. I think JOK is going to be a multi-all-pro guy starting this year. I think the Browns should use him wisely, find the matchup they like, and get him in space and let him run around like a wild man.
So the last point, we got a couple of clips for this one, is most importantly, just don't change. And that's kind of the mindset that Jim Schwartz always has.
So this is the last day of mandatory minicamp. You got Cedric Tillman versus Newsome. Very heated, very explosive, like in-your-face kind of 7-on-7. Then you're going to see Martin Emerson against Garrett against the Jets. Now, the reason I like these clips, it kind of shows the mentality that the Browns have. The Browns have this mentality of no matter who they're playing, they're going to get in your face and they're going to challenge. And I always thought, it looks great, throw the fade, but the fade percentage is so minimal, even in the NFL. When you throw the ball over 10, 15, 20 yards, that completion percentage goes way down. So I think one of the keys that the Browns have to do is not change too much. Be who they are, make the offense adjust to them. Part of their success on defense is also that offense doing their part, getting ahead, making the other team have to pass because they're behind. Special teams getting good field position, pinning them back. This is a complementary game, and this defense can be as elite as their offense and special teams are. But these two clips is kind of don't change who you are. You were really good last year. Have that swag, have that attitude, and be good at who you are. You can't do something you're not good at. So if you're going to go down swinging with what you do. It's even the Texans. They lost at what they did. That's okay.
Yeah, and to your point, the attitude is one of the reasons that they're good. They don't think they can be beat, and that's the first part to not getting beat.
Well, the thing I like about, and I think it's really going to help the Browns, Cedric Tillman, is when you got inside the red zone, even last week at a mandatory minicamp, it was probably the last session, second to last session, before they were out for the summer. And that when they put the ball on the 20, that defense, you had a little bit of trouble last year against the Texans inside the red zone, inside the 30 even. They really got an attitude. Thornhill was a leader. Hicks was a leader. Newsome is always energetic. Ward is just a quiet guy. He's a lockdown guy. So these guys played with so much emotion, even in 7-on-7 in a mandatory minicamp in June. I think they have a little bit of edge on their shoulder. They have a little bad taste from what they had to deal with last year in their last. You're only as good as your last game. The last game defense wasn't very good. That doesn't sit too well with these guys, and I expect them to respond very well against Dallas week 1.
Lance Reisland, as always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Lance.
As always, thanks for having me.
Lance Reisland, make sure you check him out, cleveland.com, as well as The Plain Dealer. Really good video breakdown, film analysis of everything related to football, especially of the Browns. That's going to do it for this edition of Sports for CLE. We'll see you back here Monday at 4 o'clock. Have a great weekend, everybody. See you Monday at 4 on Sports for CLE.